Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah, always happy to be back.
So this time around, we've got a really fascinating document to dig into. It's a personal reflection on growing up without like a strong sense of ethnic identity.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So, we're going to be looking at the challenges and maybe kind of surprisingly some of the opportunities that come up when you don't feel rooted in a
Mhm.
specific culture.
Yeah, that's a perspective you don't hear every day, so this should be pretty insightful.
For sure, especially in, today's world with so much diversity and interconnectedness, it's really interesting.
Definitely.
So the way this document is laid out, it kind of reads like a story. We're going to get the author's personal experiences, their thoughts on the effects of not having a strong cultural identity, and they even get into some potential criticisms they're expecting.
Oh, wow. That's pretty self-aware.
Yeah, and it shows that they've really thought this through.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so let's just jump right in. The author starts by giving us some background, right? Mixed race, black father, white mother, no real connection to extended family on either side.
Okay.
And they talk about growing up surrounded by all these different cultures online, but never really feeling like they belong to any specific one.
That's a really interesting point, right? It's like having all these ingredients, but no recipe.
Exactly. And then it gets even more complex because they mention that their family, they relied on religion for their sense of community,
Right.
but the author isn't religious.
Huh. So that traditional path to belonging wasn't really there.
Not really. No. So that adds another layer to it all.
Sure.
So moving on, the author dives into, what are the potential effects of growing up this way without that strong cultural identity? And they talk about this feeling of rootlessness, this kind of ambiguity when it comes to belonging. Have you ever felt that way, like not sure where you fit in?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that tension between feeling lost, but also finding a kind of freedom in that is something a lot of people with mixed backgrounds or unclear cultural backgrounds experience. It's uh it's both challenging and kind of freeing at the same time.
Yeah, it's like a double-edged sword, right?
Exactly.
And the author talks about some ways they've coped with that, like journaling, researching different cultures, even creating like sub-personalities as a way to explore different parts of themselves.
So personalities. Huh. That's interesting. It reminds me of like Jungian archetypes.
Oh, yeah.
Could it be that they're tapping into this universal need to explore different aspects of the self no matter what your cultural background is?
That's a really cool connection. It makes you think about whether these coping mechanisms are actually, acts of self-discovery, building resilience in the face of all this uncertainty.
I think there's definitely a link there. And this whole idea of rootlessness versus freedom, it kind of echoes what sociologists call anomie, that feeling of
Yeah.
being disconnected from social norms. It's fascinating how they navigate all this.
It's like they're making their own compass, right? Figuring it out as they go.
Yeah, exactly.
But as you can imagine, they also know there are going to be criticisms of this whole approach. So that's what we're going to get into in the next part of our deep dive.
Looking forward to it. So yeah, I think diving into these criticisms is going to be really interesting, especially since it touches on that bigger conversation about cultural respect and individual expression. Especially when someone's actively trying to create their own sense of cultural identity.
Right. Like, where's the line between appreciation and appropriation?
Exactly. And the author really tackles this head on.
Yeah.
They talk about the importance of engaging with cultures, respectfully focusing on universal themes, and using fiction as a way to reflect reality, not to escape it.
Yeah, and that emphasis on transparency, I think that's really key. Being upfront about your intentions, giving credit where credit is due, it goes a long way.
It's like if you're invited into someone's home,
Mm.
right? You treat their space, their stories with respect. You don't just barge in and say, oh, this is mine now.
I love that analogy. That's perfect. And the author also brings up that criticism that creating your own culture could be seen as like disconnecting from the real world, like oversimplifying things.
Yeah, I can see that point. While
Yeah.
that wanting to forge your own path, it does make you wonder if it risks missing those nuances of actual cultural exchange. It's a good question. Is something only authentic if it's rooted in tradition, or can authenticity come from individual expression?
That's a tough one for sure. It's definitely complex, but the author argues that this personal creation isn't about separation, it's about connection, using elements of fantasy and fiction to try and make sense of their own identity.
So it's more like weaving a tapestry, right?
Right.
Drawing from different threads to create something unique and meaningful.
Exactly. And then there's that final criticism that using fantasy as the foundation for your identity might not be seen as legitimate.
Yeah, that's where things get really tricky, right? The clash between individual expression and what society deems acceptable, like who gets to decide what's a valid way to form an identity.
Totally. And I love how the author responds to this. They point out that cultures are always evolving, always incorporating elements of fiction and myth and storytelling.
Right. It's a good reminder that identity is dynamic. It's a process, not a fixed point. You're always being shaped by internal and external forces. It's about the journey, not finding the one right answer.
So with all these criticisms and, really thoughtful responses laid out, the author then gives us some practical strategies for moving forward.
Okay, this is where it gets really useful, I think, especially for anyone listening who's dealing with these same questions about identity and belonging. You know,
Yeah, for sure.
the author really stresses the importance of intention. Like, why are you exploring these cultures? Why are you creating your own? Are you trying to understand yourself better, connect with others, express your creativity? It all matters.
It's like setting your compass before you set sail, right? Knowing your direction makes it easier to navigate.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then there's the whole idea of balance, finding that sweet spot between respecting existing cultures and making space for your own expression.
So if you're drawing inspiration from real cultures, you got to do the work. Dive deep into their history, their values, what makes them significant. And if you're building your own world, acknowledge those influences, be respectful of the traditions you're drawing from.
Exactly. And this leads to what the author calls a hybrid approach.
Hmm.
Identity isn't an either-or thing. You can pull from both real and fictional sources, blend them together, and create something totally unique to you.
It reminds me of something they said later on. They described themselves as a human mutt.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a powerful image, isn't it? It really captures that whole idea of embracing complexity, challenging that notion that identity has to fit neatly into a box.
Totally. There's this sense of acceptance, but also defiance in that statement. And it makes me think, how have you navigated this whole identity thing in your own life? It sounds like you've really taken that to heart. Identity as a journey and not a destination.
Yeah, it's about the exploration for sure. And it kind of brings us back to the author's idea of being a human mutt and the challenges of, actually sharing this self-created identity with other people.
It's one thing to explore it in your own head, but how do you bring it out into the world?
Right, like they've created this intricate map of their own identity, but how do you share that with someone who might have a completely different map?
Exactly.
What I find really powerful, though, is the author's focus on being adaptable and open to dialogue.
Yeah.
They get that sharing this personal creation, it makes you vulnerable, and it takes a willingness to listen and learn and adapt.
It's like they're saying, hey, this is a work in progress for me, and I'm open to hearing your perspective, too.
Yeah, and that takes guts.
For sure, especially in today's world. I think being open to that kind of fluidity and learning from others is so important.
Absolutely.
So to kind of sum it all up, we've explored this really unique perspective on growing up without a clear sense of ethnic identity. We talked about that feeling of rootlessness, but also the potential for creative freedom. And we dove into the complexities of, engaging with different cultures respectfully and with empathy.
It's been a thought-provoking deep dive for sure, and I think it really highlights the value of embracing a hybrid approach to identity. We're all a mix of different influences, and that's something to celebrate.
Couldn't agree more. And as we wrap up here, I want to leave you with something to think about. The author's story really got me thinking about all the assumptions we make about identity, and it made me wonder, how do you define your own sense of belonging? Where do you find community and connection in this world full of diverse cultures and individual experiences? It's a question worth asking ourselves, I think.
Absolutely, and I don't think there's one right answer. It's different for everyone.
So true. Well, that's all the time we have for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us. And remember, identity is a journey, not a destination. Embrace the exploration, engage with others, and keep learning until next time. Keep exploring, everyone.